Hi, I'm Tina McIntyre, and today I'm going to share with you the Florida Friendly principle about mulch. So I'm the Florida Friendly Landscaping Agent at the UF-IFAS Extension in Seminole County. And today we're going to be talking about mulch. We're going to be comparing the different types of mulches, and then we're going to be talking about how to use mulch in the landscape. So you want to think about which plants, you would naturally prefer in your landscape. So why do we mulch? Well, we mulch to help hold that moisture at the soil and the root zone. Here's another example of a well-mulched landscape versus a landscape that we do have erosion problems and then poor aesthetics as well. Again, Florida-friendly landscaping, this is one of the 9 Florida-friendly principles. So you might be familiar with these, you've probably heard about them already, but it starts off with having the right plant in the right place. And really we do all this to protect our water quality and water quantity in our aquifer, our lakes, rivers, and streams. So what is mulch? Well, mulch is any material applied to the soil surface to protect or improve the area that we cover. It's a pretty broad, definition of mulch. There are a lot of benefits of mulch. So it protects our plants from mechanical damage. Mulch kind of keeps those weed whackers away from the trunks of our trees and helps to cover those roots, which are really don't like sunlight and don't like to be treaded upon. Mulch also provides us lots of benefits, including improving the soil health. And here in Florida, we have a lot of sandy soils. Having been underwater throughout geological history, we have sandy soils. And so by adding mulch, we're going to be enhancing that organic material. And as it breaks down, it's going to, kind of break down into soil. It's also, while it's there, going to buffer soil temperature, prevent soil compaction, and mineralize that erosion that we talked about earlier. So it helps prevent stormwater runoff and having those particulates. Our sandy soils are also high in phosphorus, which is considered a pollutant in our waterways. And so if you have a lot of erosion on your site, you might also be contributing to the pollution of your waterway. So you want to think about adding mulch to the landscape. It also eases maintenance. So it improves filtration of water by kind of absorbing that water and slowing it down. It prevents the water loss by evapotranspiration and a loss from evaporation, and increases the soil water holding capacity, which means that when it rains or when you irrigate, you're going to have more water available in the long term for those plant roots to absorb. It inhibits weed seed germination. I know as master gardeners, you probably appreciate being able to do that. And it suppresses those weeds from growing. Now, allelopathy might not be a term that you're familiar with, but it's an amazing aspect of plants' ability to inhibit the growth of other plant species. So the plant actually emits chemicals that prevent and inhibit the growth of other plants. Fresh mulches have these chemical properties. And so by laying down eucalyptus, melaleuca, and pine straw mulches, they may exhibit long-term allelopathic properties, which means when we put it down in the landscape, we're going to be preventing weeds from growing. Both positive and negative effects, obviously, it can inhibit our weeds, but it also can inhibit those small little young bedding plants or seedlings that we might be trying to establish. Some additional benefits of mulch is that it improves plant performance. So additional roots form in the mulch layer, which more roots mean more vigor, more water absorption, juicier tomatoes, as you can see this kid planting here. It yields more roots than an unmulched plant and helps establish newly planted trees and shrubs. It also adds beauty to our landscape. And so as gardeners, we want that beauty and want that uniform aesthetic, and mulch can help to provide that. It can also provide a little contrast, which can have a nice landscape design appeal. There's a variety of colors that you can choose from, a lot of interesting textures, and it gives the landscape a finished appearance. And so now we're going to look at criteria for selecting mulches. So some of the types of criteria that you could use are the color, the scent, and the texture. You also want to consider the longevity and durability of the mulch that you select. You want to think about where that mulch is coming from. Where are we sourcing it from? I know a lot of the times it's easy just to grab a bag from the store or the nursery, but we want to try to figure out what type of species is it? What type of area is it coming from? Is it coming from a timber agricultural operation, or is it from a natural habitat such as a wetland? Of course, availability and price are important. We want to think about the decomposition rates of this mulch. So, of course, mulch is usually just made up of dead trees. And so we want to think about how quickly is the propensity of this tree to biodegrade and to decompose. Different mulches have different rates. Want to think about also how that mulch and the repetitive application of that mulch is going to change our soil. So like I mentioned, it's going to break down, and as it breaks down, is it going to change the pH and the soil chemistry, and then also the susceptibility to termites? So kind of breaking down each one of these, we want to consider the aesthetics. Some people love dyed mulches and red mulches. Others despise it. So it really is just what do you like and what are your preferences? Longevity. So inorganic mulches tend to last longer. The longest lasting organic mulches are usually the Melaleuca, which is from an invasive species, but it's just the hard wood of the tree. And so it's also treated that you wouldn't be experience any germination of the invasive Melaleuca on your property. So it's a great kind of taking away a resource that's a problem in our natural communities and turning it into a solution in our home communities. Pine bark is also a very long-lasting mulch, and this is all from a 2-year study by UF IFAS. Organic mulches must be replenished at least annually. So, you want to consider that. And one thing that you can do to make your mulch last longer, now this is only for our pathways. We don't want to use it in conjunction with our plants because the plants will need water, but is actually utilizing cardboard under that mulch. So if you have a mulch pathway, you put down the cardboard, make sure all the tape and staples are out of it, put that cardboard down and put 2 to 3 inches of mulch on top of it. You won't see the cardboard anymore, but it'll inhibit the weeds from growing up through, and you won't have to use that weed fabric that is a plastic blend. So I really recommend that. But again, you won't want to use it in your landscaping beds or in any areas around trees because it's going to be hydrophobic, preventing the water from going into the root zone. So only in mulch pathways or in those types of areas. So to select a mulch, availability and cost, it depends on the region of the state and of course freight costs. So to get something all the way down to South Florida, it's going to be a little bit more, if it's on a freight, it's going to have that much more mileage. Inorganic mulches are generally more expensive initially, but it needs to be refreshed less frequently. So you're not, constantly putting it down. So some types of mulches, what I call true mulches or organic material mulches, that's going to be basically your dead trees in some way, shape, or form. Of course, it's going to be bark. So think pine bark, wood chips. That's actually the heartwood of the tree, shred up and ground up. Leaves could also be a mulch. And if you think about how the forest naturally mulches itself, it's 100% leaves. And, occasionally we have a tree fall down and we have that start to biodegrade, but leaves are really where it's at when it comes to how the forest naturally has its mulching happen. And so we want to use those leaves in our landscape. If you're worried about those leaves kind of blowing around or creating an aesthetic you don't like, a little tip that I like to use is to put those leaves in your landscape beds and then cover it with just a little bit of the mulch that you like. So you're putting those leaves back into the soil enhancing the organic matter, recycling, but also getting that nice aesthetic on top and holding them down. Pine needles are great. They're very sustainable. And grass clippings, of course, as we, mow our lawn, we want to utilize that in the landscape as well. Types of inorganic materials are going to be gravel, pebbles, shell, rubber, polyethylene film, and woven ground cloths. Pine bark mulch, one of my favorites. It retains its color. It's a byproduct of the timber industry, which we have fairly close throughout Georgia and North Florida, readily available. It decomposes very slow. It has low nutrient content. So, you're gonna have to use it in conjunction with a compost or something if you're looking for that. And it can be slightly acidic, but again, a great mulch selection. You have the large pine bark mulch versus the pine fines, which is basically just more ground up. So these are great for, in your pots with maybe blueberries and things like that. And this large bark is going to be more for, landscaping bed. Then you have your Melaleuca mulch. This retains color very well. It's harvested from invasive plant stands again, so they do treat it to kill those seeds. It decomposes very slow. It's low in nutrients, so again, you could use in conjunction with a compost or a fertilizer. It has pretty good allelopathic properties, and so you're going to get, typically a lot of weed prevention, and maybe not so good for those little baby sprouts. Termites like it the least. It does have those natural, volatile, organic essential oils, and so they kind of repels insects. It does not float. I meant to mention the pine bark does tend to to float. So you want to watch out using that on any kind of a slope or near a water body because the pine bark will float away. This tends to not float as much, so it would be a better selection. Eucalyptus mulch, it has great color retention. It is low durability, so it tends to break down quicker. It's harvested from plantations. It's low in nutrients. It has high allelopathic properties, and it decreases in volume once it's settled. And so that's another thing that we look at is the settling potential of the mulch. So after we put it down, does it tend to kind of deflate and need sprucing up again pretty rapidly? Pine straw, another one of my favorites, again, a byproduct of the timber industry, readily available at most of your local nurseries, and in the fall, sometimes even at your box stores. It does have poor color retention, so it tends to go from that vibrant brown to a grayish color. But again, it has other positive aspects. So rapidly decomposes, so you do want to kind of place it down and refresh it more commonly. It is high in nutrients, and so it's gonna provide a little bit more in terms of, actually as it breaks down to your plants than say those other harder mulches. It does lower the soil pH, so you want to watch out if you have an already acidic landscape as shown by a soil test, and you're constantly adding these pine. It's fine if you have acidic loving plants like azaleas and blueberries. But if you're trying to grow things that like it a little bit higher on the pH spectrum, you might want to just take that into consideration. This also showed the highest allelopathic effect, so really inhibiting those weeds and other things. Some of the common landscape mulches, just for an overview, termites can eat any type of mulch. And so, you just want to keep that in mind and don't put mulches too close to your house. There is an effect on soil pH for pine straw, pine bark, and our cypress as well. And the best color retention was the pine bark and the Melaleuca. So just kind of general overviews there. Then we have what we call alternative mulches, which could be considered seashells, dyed mulch, gravel, pebbles, crushed stone, recycled yard waste, utility mulch, grass clippings, leaves, and compost. So for dyed mulch, this is typically going to be made from your recycled pallets. You want to buy it from a reputable source to ensure that the dyes are non-toxic and it might be a soybean-based ink. and that the wood is not pressure treated. So, especially if you're growing edibles, you just want to keep that in mind. Gravels, pebbles, and crushed stone are going to be available in a variety of colors. They're permanent and fireproof. They can increase the soil moisture. So again, you're going to have that condensation kind of, and then, creating that more water area. It will stay in place during a high rainfall, and lawnmowers can pick it up and throw the stones. So that would be a con, is that, if you hire somebody and they come by, they can get scattered pretty easily. And it reflects the solar radiation, and it does generate heat. So you want to be careful utilizing these with plants that might be a little more sensitive. Florida Friendly does not recommend cypress mulch, and that's because they come from our wetlands, and the origins might be difficult to determine. So, cypress trees make up our Florida wetlands, and they're really important when we talk about, flooding mitigation, storm mitigation. We don't want to be turning those into mulch. So we want to select things that are a little bit more sustainable rather than, selecting trees from our wetlands. We also don't recommend rubber mulch, and it's because it can leach heavy metals and other chemicals into the soil and aquifer, or it can actually just pick up and float away and run off into our water bodies. The leachate from rubber can kill entire aquatic communities, including zooplankton, snails, fish, and algae. And they absorb heat. So, the roots really like that buffering of soil temperature, and your natural mulches are going to do that, where this one's going to absorb heat and heat up the roots of your plant. These rubber mulches also do not contribute nutrients or organic matter. So I mentioned that the soils here in Florida tend to be sandy, and we want to add organic material as frequently as we can. These don't offer that. Yard waste. So Florida law actually prohibits the disposal of yard waste in lined landfills. We want to retain those nutrients in our landscape. We don't want to be sending debris to our landfills, which again, fill up rapidly and create leachate and things like that. So we want to use those leaves and debris in our landscapes. Think of ways that you can creatively recycle those and save money on fertilizer, mulch, and waste disposal. I personally love utility mulches. I look for those, the contractors for the utility companies that drive down the street, usually in the springtime, and they're cutting my neighbor's oak limbs. And oak limbs are fantastic. Another great one would be maybe red maple or pine. Any of our native trees are going to be great for when they're trimming up. You just want to be careful for any weedy invasive seeds that might be, you really want to know what you're getting when you're choosing a utility mulch so that you're not spreading invasive species. And these are offered free by many municipalities. And then also you can try chip drop. Now, check the internet for it because it is quite comical. They let you know that you don't have a say in the quantity or quality of mulch that you're getting, but in some instances it could be a good fit. So there's a lot of companies out there that will be happily, share this with you as they're trying to get rid of it. Grass clippings, we want to keep those on our lawn, use the grass clippings in our landscape. That's equivalent to 1 fertilizer application per year if we can keep those landscapes on our, keep those grass clippings on our landscape. They're easily transported via stormwater, so we don't want them on paved surfaces. And we want to apply grass clippings as a mulch sparingly because they are, green. And so as they decompose, they can cause a thick matting, a layer, and actually create a little heat going on if you have some sensitive seedlings. Again, I can't sing leaves praises more. So in a natural ecosystem, this is how mulch occurs. And we want to use those oak leaves, use those pine needles that are created in our landscape, in our landscaping beds to create a self-mulching area. Compost is a fantastic way of improving our soil fertility. We want to, use our leaves, our kitchen scraps, and then compost them down and spread it in the landscape as mulch. It does help to, add that nitrogen into your landscape. So how do we use mulch in the landscape? Well, using recycled materials when possible. So like we mentioned, use those leaves and the debris. Don't pile it up against the trunk. So you can see here this beautiful oak tree and it's just mounded up around the trunk. Now, chances are, if I was to dig down in here, I would see that the roots don't start till 6 inches to maybe even a foot below that mulch line. And what happens is we have rotting start to occur around the trunk of the tree, and that can ultimately lead to decline. So we want to make sure that we're not mulching up the tree. We want to keep the pull back that mulch 1 to 2 inches away from the plant, and then apply deep enough to suppress those weeds. So 2 to 3 inches is good. Want to mulch the driveways and walkways to direct traffic. This is a great way to kind of train the eye. Here's where you drive, here's where you walk. Avoid soil compaction in planted areas. And then mulch can replace turf ground covers. So use it in shady, wet, or difficult to mow areas. Applying mulch. So how much do we use? Well, the magic is about 2 to 3 inches, but you want to allow 1 to 2 inches of space between the plant. Again, don't mulch right up to the plant stem or trunk because it's just going to kind of smother it and rot. So you want to pull it back away, but once you get away, you want 2 to 3 inches of a nice layer of mulch. Contact with that plant can result in wood rot or, just really, if the mulch is decomposing, it's going to be hot and it actually will burn some of your younger plants as well. It'll harbor fungus, pathogens, bacteria, and cypress or citrus trees are particularly sensitive to this. Again, volcano mulching is what we call it. So we don't want to mulch right up to the trunk and want to avoid, pull that back. Really, in a way, this is a waste of mulch. It's just too much. It's overkill. But you do see it pretty often. And with that, that is our mulch presentation. Thank you so very much. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll talk again later.